Okay, so the next chapter in our sequence is, I believe, chapter 10 in the book. It's photosynthesis. We're going to go back to cellular respiration after photosynthesis. And photosynthesis, I think, solves kind of this question. That's one that's perplexing, and it turns out that most people really don't realize. And the question is simply, you know, here, if you bought a plant your freshman year of college and left it until hopefully it's 4 years until you finish from college, then that plant goes from 5 pounds to 155 pounds. And the question is, where does the 155 pounds come from, or 150 pounds come from? And most of us will say, if you ask all your friends or whatever, they would say very clearly that the plant must pull it from the ground. But that's not the case. In fact, if you were to look at the dirt, and let's say you did an experiment where you actually measured the weight of the dirt that you'd have to replace over that 4 years while this tree grew, you would see that the dirt mass doesn't change. And so where does the mass of that plant come from? And in fact, it comes from the air, and we'll see how that process works over the course of these next few lectures. It comes from carbon dioxide in the air, and literally the process of photosynthesis is a process of what's called carbon fixation, in which you take carbon dioxide from the air and fix it to form organic uh, compounds. And this process, I think, I mean, it's not magical, but this is one of the most amazing processes in the biological world, in my opinion. I mean, here you are taking an inorganic substance, carbon dioxide, and somehow you're making an organic substance, and this substance forms the backbone of all biological molecules. All right, so it's a really profound implication. Um, I think I might have said this in the last lecture, but the primary producers who make this actually, make enough energy not only for themselves, chemical energy not only for themselves, but also for every uh, living organism on the planet. And if we look at kind of the flow of this food, we have what are called the primary producers. So they convert the energy of sunlight, energy of sunlight into chemical energy, which can then be consumed, consumed by us. So we call these primary producers autotrophs, and then things that consume them are heterotrophs. So humans and all other animals are heterotrophs. We can't make any energy, or we can't convert the energy of sunlight directly. We have to get it either by consuming the plants directly or consuming the animals that consume the plants, right? And we'll look at this food flow in detail in ecology and in Bio 112. And so most of the times when we think about photosynthesis, we think about plants, but there are many other photosynthetic organisms. In fact, the cyanobacteria cause what's called the first oxygen holocaust, right? When they first came about, the world was predominantly anaerobic, had a lot of methane, not a lot of oxygen, and they actually took the energy of the sun and they produced oxygen as a waste product, and that oxygen turned out to be toxic for most bacteria, which are what are called obligate anaerobes. and they can't have oxygen. And so when cyanobacteria came about, they killed 99% of all the biodiversity on the planet, um, and produced so much oxygen that it created the modern um, oxygen conditions. Right now, we have about 20, I think it's 22% oxygen in the air. Um, and this is because of the work of cyanobacteria, and yet here we are giving all the credit to plants, right? It's not fair. Okay, but let's go to plants. Um, so this is the basic formula that we're going to be looking here. This is what plants do. They pull, they use some water. They pull carbon dioxide from the air in the presence of sun, and then they generate water as a waste product, and they generate oxygen as a waste product. All right. And so the inputs are carbon dioxide, sunlight, and water. And the outputs of this reaction are going to be oxygen, water again, and then energy in the form of um, sugar. Uh, so here, chemical energy. So you're taking the energy of the sun, converting chemical energy with water and oxygen as byproducts. So the water kind of gets regenerated. Carbon dioxide doesn't get converted directly to oxygen, but oxygen is released as a waste product here. Okay, and so that's the kind of chemical formula that we're going to be studying for these next few lectures. Now, before we do that, we have to do a little bit of chemistry, and most of us haven't had chemistry, so I have to talk a little bit about oxidation reduction reactions, or what are called redox reactions. So, oxidation reduction reactions involve the transfer of electrons. And electrons, as we will see for the next few chapters, are kind of like the money of the cell, although you can't really spend it. But they are high energy, and they are the way in which uh, we convert other forms of energy into chemical energy, right? So whenever we see electrons moving, we know that with that movement goes kind of the energy and the currency of the process. And redox reactions always involve the transfer of electrons. So there must always be a loss of electrons on one end and a gain of electrons on another end. So they have to, these are coupled together. They have to occur. You can't have the loss of electron without the gain of electron someplace else. And you'll go deep into this in general chemistry. You'll start talking about half reactions and all sorts of fun stuff, but we won't go that hard in GBio. And so this is a look of that here. Um, Whenever a compound has electrons, we call it reduced, right? And so the way I like to think about it is that electrons have a negative charge, so anything that's carrying it is going to be reduced in charge or lower in charge than something that doesn't have it. And so the electrons, when they get transferred, they reduce some other compound, right? So here the electrons have gone from A to B. Now, in this case, when the electrons leave a compound, it's called oxidized. So a compound that doesn't have the electrons is oxidized. A compound that has the electrons is reduced. So here you have um, compound B, which is oxidized, and then when it picks up these electrons, it becomes reduced, right? And we can look not only at the transfer of electrons directly, but we can also transfer electrons in the form of hydrogen atoms. And so remember, a hydrogen is just a proton and electron, right? So it's one proton and one electron. There are no neutrons that are associated with hydrogen, right? So here you can look at the transfer of hydrogen atoms. And in this case, even though you're transferring hydrogen atom, you're really thinking about the transfer of that electron. So compounds can either transfer the electrons directly or they can transfer hydrogen atoms, but it's still the transfer of electrons. Now, generally, when that happens, you transfer it to what is called an electron carrier. This particular one is NAD+. So NAD+ has an oxidized form and it has a reduced form. Right? And so here, the oxidized form, what happens? It picks up a pair of hydrogens from this reduced compound. It becomes reduced. This becomes in this case, becomes oxidized. Um, and then it is able to carry the electrons that are associated with this hydrogen to some other molecule. And so here, A is reduced. It passes those electrons to NADH, or to NAD plus to form NADH, and then NADH passes these electrons to compound B to reduce compound B, right? This is why NADH is called an electron carrier, because it doesn't hold on to it, it just transports it from one place to another. The net result is that you've oxidized compound A and then reduced compound B. And we will see the entire process of the breakdown of sugar is one in which you're basically transferring electrons first to NADH and then to what's called the electron transport chain so that you can make ATP via the process of oxidative phosphorylation. And as I said before, this is the total process of what's going on. We have carbon dioxide and water and energy of sunlight, and then we form a sugar and a molecular oxygen. So here what's going on is that we are reducing carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is very oxidized. We're reducing carbon dioxide and we're oxidizing water in this process. And then this is the chemical reaction or the chemical formula of NAD. It's not really important in biochem to go in a little bit more detail of this, but hopefully you can point out if you look, there are four biological macromolecules, right? What are they? Amino acids, lipids, um, shoot, carbohydrates, and nucleic acids, right? I'm sure Dr. Handy went over that with you. And so you can look at this. This is NAD, and you should be able to tell which of these four it is, right? And so let's just take a couple of seconds to do that. We should think about what are the features of each of these. What are the features of the amino acid? We have an alpha carbon, an amino group, carboxylic acid group. Lipids have long chains of hydrocarbons. Carbohydrates always have a ratio of uh, one water molecule to one carbon. And nucleic acids have a nitrogen containing base, a ribose sugar, and phosphate groups, right? And so if you look at this, NAD, you should be able to see nitrogen containing base, ribose sugar, phosphate groups, right? So this is a modified nucleic acid. Instead of the last phosphate group, it's been replaced with this nicotinamide group, which allows for the pickup and transfer of, hydrogens and therefore electrons. Um, okay, so these electron carriers actually have a lot of energy associated with them. When you oxidize NADH, the delta G that's released there is about negative 50 kilocalories per mole. That's about 7 times more than, say, ATP hydrolysis. So there's a lot of impact from the oxidation of NADH to NAD plus. And we're going to use that to form ATP ultimately. Okay, I'm going to stop there and then we'll pick up on some good old-fashioned physics to prep us for going through the photosynthetic system.